Now, Nandita, you handle HR. Let me start with you. Now, you had us explaining the age of disruption. Vineet said, you are literally dead, you are a walking zombie. And CP warned you that you better assimilate technology. Now, tell me, as a HR person, how do you see this change happening? And what is your response to what has been said earlier?
So I think Vineet is absolutely right. I think if HR does not change and change fast, it's going to be like that tree which loses its roots. I believe that the whole HR function, along with many other functions, it's not just HR. I mean, just because today is HR, we are making them the punching bag. But I mean, many other functions, like finance, like IT, all of them can get outsourced, right, into a very common platform, because today with the whole advent of technology and a very, very savvy millennial group which is going to get into leadership positions, and the new generation called the Zers, which is going to come in, they believe that they should interface only with a machine. Very rarely do they want interactions with people. So one of the first things I think HR has to realize is they do not want to see your face. They would rather have user-friendly interfaces in which they ask the questions, they get the answers, and plus they should be able to make decisions on those platforms. Let's take an example. A salary structure. If there is a common way of creating a salary structure, people get onto that platform and design how they want their salaries to be sent to them every month, right? It need not be the same thing for everybody. Whereas today we have got very hard rules on how the structures of those salaries would be at different levels. In terms of recruitment, and I believe that this would be the most significant change, we believe that all employees who have to come on employee contracts which are long-term. And we believe that that is a safety net, because generations before believed that it was safer to have an employment which is, you are on the contract. Our generation realized that contract means nothing. 2 months later, you can be let go. I think the next generation will insist that they have short-term contracts. Short-term could be 1 or 2 years, but they will select projects and organizations where they want to work. And more often than not, they will work in multiple organizations at the same time, just like consultants do. So I think the whole consultant and contractor community is increasing every year, and I think HR is not getting, seeing it on the wall, the writing on the wall, in saying that these typical employee contracts must go, which is why very unique positions, like say a data scientist. People pay a bomb to get a data scientist, right? And then actually use him only for 25% of the time. You move him into a contractual thing where he can work with 4 different people, your whole cost optimization and many other things can go on. So I agree with what you have said, that I think one of the functions which can dramatically change in the age of disruption would be HR.
Vineet, now you have been a little bit distant from industry, having been CEO. Now, and you spoke about how HR faces the greatest disruption because the way of working is changing dramatically. How do you think organizations should reconfigure themselves to meet this new challenge? What changes should organizations do from the CEO viewpoint?
So I think there are 2 learnings for me in 2 experiments we did. One was in HCL where, the emphasis and focus towards employees resulted into multi-billion-dollar growth in market cap. But the recent experiment in Sampark Foundation is very interesting in terms of the fact that there are about 100,000 teachers involved in 76,000 schools impacting 7 million children who are part of the Sampark Foundation, Sampark Smart Class program. And the same set of people who were supposed to be the so-called problem because they will never come to school and they are not interested in teaching, they are more interested in knitting and business, are suddenly the cause of the tremendous change in learning outcomes happening in primary schools in 4 states. So I think the question here is that when the purpose of the organization changes from the top, the troops align. So the reconfiguration which is required from the CEO office is to redefine the purpose of the existence of the organization and the expectation the CEO has from each constituent member. So I think if the CEO were supposed to challenge the HR sleeping giants to be intellectually more relevant to the organization, get better analytics, train themselves more, I think the rest of the reconfiguration will really become. So the CEO may not understand the trends of the future, and I absolutely agree with CP that every technology disruption which has happened has created more jobs at the industry level. But the only difference is the top 5 have not remained top 5 post the depression. There is a new top 5 which has come in. So if the CEO wants to continue with the top 5 in an industry which will have more jobs than the past, then he has to set a new benchmark of expectations, intellectual involvement and intellectual response to disruptions from each of the departments, including HR.
Well. CP, you are at the heart of the change that is happening being a CEO of an enterprise. And you work in the Valley, you're in technology. What are the changes you're seeing? And what are the pace of change that you're seeing? And how do you think this change is going to impact, let's say, enterprises by 2020, 3 years from now?
So one thing I can tell you is that, when Vineet gave the example of the old tree and the young tree, it was very, very clear that he was referring to me. And for a change, he said, I will prevail, things can change. And then, I started smiling to myself, saying that in our case, the oldest member is 75 and the youngest is 20. So how many generations are we catering to? And I thought I am going to take a diary and take notes from Nandita, because she has the names for each generation. So anyway, coming back, guys, I think there are 2 parts that have been discussed. And the only reason I repeat them is because some of them are gospel truths. A CEO's office defines strategy. Now, that is the normal way of, saying what a CEO does. But the reality is that CEO defines the culture of the organization. And when the CEO defines the culture of the organization, the strategy automatically follows. Now, in the culture, you may decide that the culture of this organization is all about learning, or a culture of this organization is that my employee is more relevant to the market condition. The moment you start looking at adding value to your employee and hence adding value to your customer, I think you've defined a paradigm to be not just the top 5, but really top 5 forever. Because your strategy bets will go wrong. You may decide tomorrow that if you are a textile company, that this is your fashion prediction. You may decide to have one wrong fashion prediction. Similarly, you may decide to bet on a technology or a solution that the market does not accept it in the right time. But if your people are resilient, if your people are agile, if your people are learning, then you can always regroup and create. It's not that every Apple product has been successful. It is not that every Facebook launch has been successful. It is not that Google's every product has been successful. The question is, there is a culture which has defined how they react in the marketplace, how they are able to maintain a trajectory. So if at all, if I'm seeking help from HR, I'm seeking help in being able to understand that there are 5 generations or 4 generations in every organization. How do you weave them together for one common mission? And number 2 is, how do we remain relevant to the market, relevant to the customer?
Yeah, go ahead with it.
Yeah, I need to respond to CP because he has made some acquisitions. So, just stating the fact that I am a tree who's already dead and he's still standing in the industry. which means I was more beautiful than him. The second point he has said is very interesting. I just want to emphasize so you get it, is that some CEOs like him are blessed with the knowledge that the long-term strategy is through employees. But if the CEO is not blessed with the knowledge that an HR can't convince the CEO of this logic, then you don't have the right to exist in that job. So one, you cannot say that my CEO doesn't get it. That's not good enough. So you have to sell it. And if you can't sell it, like if the CEO doesn't sell the strategy to the board, then the CEO doesn't have the right to exist. Then CEO has to lead the board. CEO has to carry the board on a new strategy and a new investment and new technology. Similarly, if an HR guy cannot convince the CEO of CP's argument on how long-term strategies around people centricity, then I think you should question your very competence in existence.
Nandita, now strong statements have been made. You too made a strong statement. You joined the gang. But an organization is made of real people, all right? They're real people. They have fears, worries, and it's difficult to change. What are the 5 changes that I would like to see in an organization to respond to the age of disruption? Led by HR, of course. Give me 5 ideas where I think the takeaways for all these people.
So I think the first one would be the culture. I like the point that if the HR head cannot convince the CEO that, about the importance of people and culture, then frankly, you must look for another company. I think the first piece is to ask yourself that question, because I meet a lot of HR executives and HR heads who come and say, it's different in IT because it's people-centric, whereas, we work in manufacturing or we work in telecom or, other industries where the CEO doesn't believe that, employee is the only asset that one has. So how do we convince them? I think in the age of disruption, the number one key is that people are the asset. The differentiation between one successful company and a not so successful company, I mean, you would see across levels would be the people and the leadership, right? The ability to make that, to have that discussion is very important. 2 is, I think, and I am very guilty of this too, when I was working in an organization, you tend to get very siloed into your own organization and into your own world of IT. You do not look at other industries. A lot of your competition and the best ideas actually come from other industries, which can be applied. We get into this whole mode of saying, if I belong into this industry, then only this is the karma and this is my truth. Whereas, tremendous innovations can be applied from other industries. 2 is, I think 3 is, we really need to look into the startup world. We just do not give them the respect due which they need. I mean, there are people who are going to change the way organizations will work and function. And today when I walk and talk to HR heads, because, partly because I'm an advisor to a lot of startups in the HR technology space, most of them just dismiss it off. And I'm saying, so do you have a better platform in your company? They say no. So do you want to look at this platform? No. Why not? Because it's a startup. The whole newness of something, I think we have got into this mode of saying, unless it is old, proven, and by then outdated, actually, we will not take it, right? I think the companies which will tomorrow really move ahead will be where HR heads actually start looking at the ideas which are so different and so new in the marketplace. And I think the last point would be is to make yourself extremely competent. I think the most insulting thing really is when you have a line person who takes on your job. Really, I mean, it's an answer. It's like saying anyone can do your job. I mean, you can't say it more openly than that, right? This is like somebody coming and telling me, no, this line person is good for being an HR head because he likes people. That's on the contrary, actually, HR doesn't like people. Right? It's like saying that, I love money and that's why I went into finance, right? So I think we really need to ask ourselves, how do we get more competent into the kind of business that we are in and understand, where really the money and the competitive edge comes to?
Vineet, you've been the master of change. You change your organization. Now, how do you bring about this change? What are the 3 or 4 things that you want them to understand to bring about change? Because change management and bringing about change is very critical to make a transition.
I think the learning goes to what I learned reading about Mahatma Gandhi over so many years, that he landed on the shores of India in 1915, and when he landed, he'd already practiced on an innovative idea of non-violence for about 7 years in South Africa. When he landed on the shores of India, he was welcomed by about 100,000 people in Calcutta. Within 4 or 5 years, he was the president of National Congress, and yet it took us 32 years to get independence. And if you look at what was happening during that time, it is Gandhi had a great idea. He was a visionary leader. He was surrounded with great ideas, but people didn't want independence. Only once he converted that into a mass movement with little things like salt walk and burning foreign clothes and things like that, it became a mass movement. So any change in my mind has a 3 process. Number 1, create significant dissatisfaction with status quo, which is, I hope, what I was trying to do today in terms of you will be dead, you're already obsolete, you're stinking. Unless that dissatisfaction with status quo is, companies don't change, people don't change, organizations don't change. The second is a vision of tomorrow which is so compelling and so attractive that people will jump out of their bed and go work for that vision. And I think this whole Anna Hazare anti-corruption movement was one of the few ones which we saw that people actually from all walks of life, we always thought that Delhi is a place where people will talk a lot but not do anything. And we suddenly saw Delhi on the street predominantly because they believed in the anti-corruption movement. So therefore a vision of tomorrow which is so compelling, which will galvanize people. So the ability to define that vision. And the third thing is to define series of experimental steps which will take us from where we are today, which is in a shitty place, to that vision of tomorrow. Because it's not going to be a straight line. It's going to be a series of experiments and everybody will have to involve. I think if we walk down these 3 steps, then we can deal with any disruptions and an organization can change in a very systematic and a very, very profitable way.
CP, now we heard Nandita talk about 5 things HR should do, what she wants them to do, and then we had Vineet talk about change. Now you are a CEO of an organization, thick of it. These 2 have left it behind, right? They're theorists now. You are the practitioner. What are the 3, 4 things that you have done to change your company to meet the challenges of the age of disruption?
Both Nandita and Vineet clearly have made the points which are very, very effective, because unless you execute on whether it is the dissatisfaction or whether it is your vision, nothing ever falls in place. The only thing I would like to do is more like add what has worked. Number 1 is whatever initiatives that you take, unless you can relate it to what's in it for me, it does not work. Because lofty ideals are good, but unless we can address it, what's in it for me? And I'm not saying that it is material always. Many times it is learning, many times it is growth, many times it is, being more valuable in future. But you have to address it that a successful individual only, a combination of successful individuals only make a successful program or a successful organization. The second part that I have learned is that many times those little experiments that Vineet talked about, unless you sustain them, unless you are able to convert it into a proper execution plan, you do get carried away and they just remain as an experimentation. So I would like to only add is that whether it is an HR taking up a battle cry on employees becoming relevant, or an HR taking a battle cry on saying that we will turn the organization upside down and we will empower an individual to decide his appraisal, decide his billing rates, and take a portion of those billing rates. I mean, everything is possible. They will all be bright ideas. But unless you are able to execute them, unless you are able to define the interfaces, unless you are able to say how that part of an engine will synchronize with others, I mean, then we are only talking about a marketing slogan. So,
Nandita, last round, then we opened up a Q&A. Tell us quickly, what are your expectations of HR in the next 3 years? What do you want them to do? We have spoken about what we expect from them. What do you really want them to do so that they understand the agenda for HR?
I think the first thing is to have a point of view. A lot of them believe that they are facilitators, which basically means that, you know, I don't have a strong point of view on how the organization should be run. So, you know, have your point of view. Two is that balance between being the people custodian and a business custodian. So sometimes you have to be on the side of business because it is important, you know, for us to get what we want for employees. I find some HR heads always talking about, no, you know, people should get more leave and more compensation hikes, more, you know, all the goodies. I think there should be a balance and understanding of, you know, where this comes from and how we should therefore support business. Sometimes that also means giving bad news and, you know, standing up and saying that, you know, though I'm custodian of your interests, you know, I have to break the news that probably, you know, we do not have increment hikes of two digits this year. And three is, I think somewhere they should stop and ask, what am I doing? You know, especially the business partners, really seriously, I mean, you know, just if follow-ups is what your life is, you really should be doing something else.
Vineet?
I was in this village in Chhattisgarh, and we were in a women's group. We had a meeting. There were about 35 people, women who had called me, and I'd done a workshop there for teachers in terms of not just the school, but they should change the community. And we talked about how they should write a vision for 2020. And I just want to talk about what did they write. They said, this is 9th of August, 2020. We have electricity in our villages. Our husbands have stopped beating us. All liquor shops in our vicinity are closed. And the police now responds to our requests. The positive news of that vision statement was it was written in belief and it was written in first tense. It was written the fact that it has already happened. And that would make it happen. So I would say that you should write your vision of 2020, that it is 2020, and I'm a data scientist, and I'm already respected in the organization. No change management around human behavior has happened without me, and the organization cannot survive if I walk out of the door. If you write that vision statement, then you will know what to do from here to there. If you can't even write that vision statement, you can't visualize it, then I suggest that you join a social organization today rather than in 2020.
CP, how do you want your HR to react to you now? By 2020, what do you want your HR to be?
I actually, you know, want to look at it very differently. When I'm looking at it differently, I'm basically seeking an answer out here is the whole organizations that we have built in India were always assumed that there is a demand that is already there. You know, whether it was Y2K or whether it is a soap manufacturing unit or a drug manufacturing unit, pharmaceutical, whichever, we just assume that there is a demand which is already there and all they need to build is capacity. And if you build an organization of order takers, I mean, we will be able to service that need. Now, let's assume that the market has changed and is changing, where you need to produce a product like a startup, You need to be able to reinvent yourself, not the 16, 17 times that millennials will change their jobs, but 16, 17 times where you need to become more relevant, and that you as an individual need to be that marketable commodity in 2020 or 2025. Are the organizations ready to adopt to that change, which is really empowering an individual to define what the world should look like and making them ready to be a fighter instead of an order taker?